Welcome tonight. My name is Jennifer Ulie-Wells, and I am on behalf of the Healthy Estate Initiative. Please pass the love. Tonight we're going to be talking about self-care, but more than self-care, we're going to talk about how self-care is more like self-preservation. So I'm outside because we're going to be doing an experiment, and I have one helper switching out and the other helper quickly coming to sit down because she's going to have to help me here in a hot sec. I am the executive director of Please Pass the Love, and so we do a lot of youth and school mental health stuff across the state. And when COVID hit, like many of you, we had to pivot really quick and redo what we were doing. And so one of the things that we know is really critical right now is that the mental health impact of COVID is going to far outlast the physical virus itself. Carl Weems from Iowa State just released an article last week or maybe the week before with the team that projects we'll have 50,000 additional suicides because of COVID. And so the things that we can be doing now to embed a lot of prevention will help reduce and lessen the impact in the long run. So let's see. So tonight, usually when I'm training with people, I ask them to kind of do a barometer on themselves. And one of the things when we're talking about self-care that can be really a good idea to do is in different moments, different days, different weeks, write down just 3 words that kind of represent where you're at right now. So if I asked you right now, write down 3 words that just kind of describe where you're at. Are you in a good place? Are you feeling stressed? What would those words be for you? So just hold on to those, write them down, and then in a week, in a month, in 2 days, continue to write words down that describe where you're at, because what that does is helps make our feelings more concrete, and it helps become a barometer of where we're really feeling and how we're feeling. It also helps us be more mindful of that. So every day for the last 3 weeks have I written that I'm totally stressed out. If I have, then I need to be really aware of that and try to pivot to do things to reduce my own anxiety. So tonight we're going to do kind of an experiment here. So I have an egg in a bottle. And I must like you all a lot because I went into a store today for the first time with a mask. I mean, I might as well have been in a hazmat suit because I needed to get Coca-Cola because we don't have that at our house. So tonight when we talk about self-care, we're really talking about how do we preserve this organ that is so critical to us. So this egg, remember, for those of you that are aged like me, remember the just don't do drugs. You know, this is your brain on drugs. So we like to apparently use eggs to represent brains. In a second, we'll be adding to this, but you have to remember that you only get one brain, right? And so your brain is as vital as your lungs. It's as vital as everything else. And so when we talk about self-care, self-care is not just taking a bath. It's not just getting a massage. Self-care is self-preservation. What do we need to do to make sure that in the long run, we're going to be okay? Because here's what happens, folks. If I don't engage in self-care now and I don't do the things I need to preserve my brain, it's not going to impact me today. It's not going to impact me necessarily tomorrow. It's going to impact me in a year, 5 years, 10 years, where then it's really too late to do anything about it. Or it's really harder, I should say, not too late. But we can lessen the impact now so we can prevent long-term things from happening. So today I have my daughter, my beautiful daughter, Mia, who just woke up from a nap. She is going to grab the Coca-Cola here, and this Coca-Cola tonight is going to represent cortisol. So when we get stressed out, we have this hormone that's released all around our bodies called cortisol. And anything in small doses is okay, but when things start to ramp up, that's when it becomes an issue. So I'm going to take us back to, let's just say, January. So January, we're coming off of a winter break in school. Our families are trying to get their new norm. We have maybe some minor stressors and maybe even some major stressors going on. So Mia's going to pour just a little bit in for things like maybe we had some financial stuff going on. Maybe we're going to lift it up just a little bit, kiddo. Oops, there we go. Okay. So maybe we had some financial stressors going on. Maybe we were in grad school, a little bit more. We're trying to be good parents. Stop right there. Perfect. So we're trying to do all sorts of things to be just good humans, right? You know, we're trying to pay our bills and we're trying to work and there's stress with the people we're working with, and not that kids are ever stressful or anything, but sometimes, right? And so right now, this is before anything else happened, I already have some cortisol going on in my brain, near my brain. So then, you know, we hit February, right? And so maybe around February we have some winter blues. It's all icky out all the time. It's hard. There you go. Perfect. It's sometimes hard to even get out of bed. You know, our brains are already consumed. You can't go out on that nice walk or that run. Then suddenly March hit. So this is my brain, and I know it's hard to see. It's floating around in here. You can maybe kind of see it in there. All of a sudden, this COVID thing hit. And so we already went from this as our stressor to, here's going to fill that sucker right on up. Whoa! All right, so now all of a sudden, you're good, COVID hit. We'll slow it down a little bit. And in case you're wondering, our feet are soaking with Coca-Cola right now. That's all right. So suddenly then COVID hit. So we already had all of these things going on, and you can see our brains in there. Cortisol is just like Coca-Cola, right? So in small amounts, okay, but suddenly when we put a little bit more in, suddenly we're overloaded with this high levels of stress. So, there we go. There you go. You can stop right there. Okay. And our brains are drowning. And Coca-Cola is like a corrosive. So if you hop online and you Google it, you can find out, you can clean most things you own with Coca-Cola, right? Like your toilets, your coins, everything that has anything growing on it. Turns out Coca-Cola is going to kill it. Cortisol has kind of the same impact. So if we left this egg in here for any long periods of time, what's going to happen is the Coca-Cola is going to start to dissolve and disintegrate the shell around the egg. And your brain is like the same thing. So as you have all of these corrosive, the cortisol becomes a toxin, right? And it becomes corrosive to the brain. So suddenly the brain that was functioning at high levels because it didn't have all of this around it is suddenly starting to struggle. And so that's why we see in those of you that are familiar with the adverse childhood experiences, so the ACEs, that toxic stress, especially for a developing young brain, really can have an impact. So as that brain, that developing brain is starting to grow and it has this different corrosion, you can find that all sorts of functioning, whether it's your front temporal lobes, so like your executive functioning, your amygdala, so emotional regulation, impulsivity, how am I making decisions, all of those things are impacted. So now, this is all of us in March, right? This COVID thing hit, a what the heck kind of moment. Those of you that are parents, you're trying to figure out suddenly, do I have a job? If I have a job, I have kids at home, how am I possibly going to negotiate all of this? How do I make this work? We may or may not have Wi-Fi. If you're like us at our house, our Wi-Fi is so poor. So if I'm lagging right now, it doesn't surprise me. Then I'm trying to figure out, where am I even going to get toilet paper for my family? Food. How am I going to get the food? If I go out in public, my kids can't go out in public. Oh my gosh. And then teachers, you're instantly in a matter of minutes trying to whip everything online for your students. And so that's a big deal too. So now we have in March this. So now this is where you get to be really brave. Okay. So if we don't start taking anything out of our cups, we find, or our bottles, we find that the only thing that ends up happening is we start to shake it up. So now if we have these different stressors, and we keep shaking it, so we've got to still figure out our job and a bunch of other stuff, this is what happens. We overflow. So here's what I am recommending to you tonight, and here's why I'm here tonight. We want to prevent our brains from getting to this point, because when we get to this point, we don't have control anymore, right? Our bodies start to go into survival mode. They're doing what they need to just get by. So some recommendations to, instead of just thinking of self-care as I'm going to take a bath and it's going to be okay, it's thinking about how do I do the little things so that I can dump this out, and I should probably dump it out over here, slowly by a little bit at a time, so that my brain can start to reemerge. So here are some of the things to think about when it comes to self-preservation. And again, it goes beyond just, I'm going to take that nice bath. And that's great. If you have your self-care routine, but we're dealing with we're in an age right now, you just want to hold that so everybody can see that great visual. We're in an age with COVID where it isn't always as easy as that. And we don't necessarily have access to some of the same luxuries that we did. So the first thing that's really, really critical, and we're outside doing it now, is being outside. Being outside and exercising have high levels of return on investment. One is the sun is filled with vitamin D. So that vitamin D absorbing into your skin, into your body, is a natural endorphin, right? And so what it's doing is it's burning and getting rid of some of those toxic stress, so that cortisol. Anything we can do to burn and get rid of the stress hormone is going to help us in the long run. Exercise is one of the best ways. Now, we've got to be cautious of social distancing. If I go out to Gray's Lake or anywhere else and I see people on top of themselves, I think, oh, it's good to want to be outside, but if you're exposing yourself to a virus that could land you in the hospital and you could have serious impact, you don't want to do that. So exercise, and it doesn't mean you have to go run 10 miles. I like to just walk around my block. Sometimes if I give myself a lunch break, I just go do it really quick. Sometimes those quick things can really, really be the best. The second thing, oxygen. Your body and your brain really, really need oxygen. So sometimes people hear things like yoga and meditation and they think, that's silly, I'm not going to do that. What both of those things are doing is helping to do some intentional breathing and high levels of it. So when we do intentional breathing, we get high levels of oxygen into our brains. And when we get high levels of oxygen into our brains, then our brains can also release some of that cortisol. And so when we release some of that cortisol, then our brains are not surrounded by as much toxic stress. And when our brains aren't surrounded by as much toxic stress, we find that they can improve in their functioning. Let's see. One of the worst culprits of all, the media, social media, devices, the news. I don't know that I've turned on the news really in the last probably decade and seen some really amazing, fabulous things happening. You can do well without seeing the news. So one of the things you have to be really cautious of is, where are your limits? If you find yourself flipping on social media and you find yourself flipping on the news and they end up stressing you out in the long run, don't do it. And sometimes it's not even news articles, it's what friends are posting. So sometimes right now we see people posting things about do this or don't do this, or I'm out with all my buddies and I'm taking pictures. And for those of us that have anxiety, that's very anxiety producing to see people that are not engaging in social mitigation. If you have a loved one that's on the front lines, that can be really stressful to see what people are posting. Avoid it. Cut off. Don't do it. You'll give yourself a lot more time in the day too. Another thing to think about is that our brains sometimes can fall hijacked to themselves, especially when we have high levels of cortisol. So one of the other things that we really recommend is finding things to disrupt that when your brain is hijacking itself. So if you're a person that has high levels of anxiety, finding things like puzzles, books, we talked about exercise, games, laughter, connecting with peers, which we'll talk about in a second, is another way to reduce some of the cortisol. And I just mentioned the connections piece. Connections are really critical. I'll tell you that I had a nightmare last week about Zoom, though. Sometimes we can overdo some of the electronic pieces. So don't be afraid to engage in letter writing, cards, picking up a phone. Sometimes when we see each other face to face, that's a lot too. But those connections we know help build resilience. And with that resilience, we know that we can prevent the impact of the trauma in the long run. So again, we're reducing some of our cortisol. So now we're starting to see our brain again, after it's been swimming and swimming and swimming in the high levels of cortisol. One of the other pieces that I think, especially for those of you that are in work, trying to do this work balance, especially if you're a parent, A lot of parents right now are feeling this immense amount of pressure. I've got to teach my children. We've got to follow the schedule. Everybody has these great routines that they've been posting on social media. My kids aren't adhering to it. I've got all this homework. I've got to do 4 hours of this, but I've got to do work. Don't. You do not have to. I will tell you, as a career educator, you're going to do the best that you can. And sometimes it's going to look good enough and sometimes it isn't. So you're going to have to figure out what works for you and your family. And so sorry if it's getting windy. It's getting a little windy, so I'm sorry if it's interrupting or interfering with my audio. But the other thing is establishing boundaries for yourselves. So as a family, we're going to work from 9 to 11, and then we're taking a break. And then we're taking what's called a mama break. So that's an extra half an hour. Go watch some TV. Go run around in the backyard. Do whatever you need to, because truly, if you aren't taking care of yourselves, you're not going to be able to take care of anybody else. I can't take care and keep these kids alive if I'm not taking care of myself. So sometimes you have to be selfish. The other one with that is learn the word no. No is a great strategy regardless of COVID, right? No is what, if we don't say no, that alone can fill this up with cortisol. Because sometimes we feel like if I don't do it, nobody's going to do it. I have to save the world, and I'm guilty as that as anybody. But without saying no and establishing those boundaries, we can only create a bigger demon for ourselves in the long run. And then I think my last one here, connections with others, is work break. So while some of us feel like we're getting into a good routine, we know what's going on with our work and our kids, don't be afraid to tell yourself, I'm going to work and then I'm going to take a break. And then I'm going to work, and then I'm going to take a break. Because you have to understand how anxiety functions. And right now, we're all under a lot of anxiety. When your body and your brain is under a lot of anxiety, it's kind of like when you've been sick for a while, or when you go for a workout, you end up being more tired in the long run. So don't be afraid to give yourself an opportunity to take breaks, too. Now, it doesn't mean you're sleeping all day. Because if you're falling into some of those habits, it means that something else, some depression, and some other forces are probably at work, and we want to reduce those. So we're doing everything we can to reduce the cortisol. So we're eating, we're exercising, we're sleeping enough, but not too much. We're connecting with others, we're saying no, we're having boundaries with social media. Because ultimately, we need our brains to be able to thrive. And our brains cannot thrive when they are totally surrounded by cortisol. And when we get up to the point here where there's so much, we do not have the capacity and the emotional capacity to handle it. And we don't want to get to that point. Because remember, this little egg or this little brain, once we create some damage to it, it can be really, really hard to undo that. And we don't have the opportunity, like we're blowing away out here. So we don't have the opportunity 5 or 10 years to go, you know, when that COVID thing was going on, I really shoulda, woulda, coulda. Because then the damage is done. So, let's see, what else do I want to say? No, I think those are some of the big things, right? And some of those seem like basic things. And if they were basic and we all did them, we would be in a way better place. But unfortunately, we don't all practice what we preach. And I'm as guilty as anybody. What would you say? Is there anything that you want to add that especially if parents have like teenagers and things and they don't know, like teenagers like to hide out right now. My daughter and both my son, they've told me a lot. I need my alone space. Like, after this is over, you won't see me for how long? Weeks at least, because we're going to go be with our friends. We're doing that. So what would you recommend to parents on here that maybe have teens or kids that are stressed right now? What would you do?
I guess to help your own teens, I would say just like understanding that like with a lot of schoolwork and stuff like that, it's new for us. And so, like, immediately pushing it and being like, you have to do this, you have to do this at this time, and do this at this time, and, like, I don't know, just being, like, super strict about it can be really, really stressful. So just, like, having some leeway and, like, being able to slowly get into it would be really helpful.
All right. How did you feel, or how do you think a lot of teens felt Friday when they heard that the school was closed for the rest of the year?
Heartbroken.
Yeah.
Sad.
Yeah. What are you missing out on this year, your junior year of high school?
I missed prom on Saturday. That was my first prom.
Yeah.
I'm missing all my senior friends. I have a lot of friends who are seniors, missing getting to say goodbye to all of them. I was supposed to sing with my choir at graduation. Not going to do that. There's a lot of things.
So what would you recommend, or what do you do for your own stress? Coping skills. Yeah. What do you do?
I do a lot of art, and I plan out when I'm going to do stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So if you have some questions and you want to start to shoot them our way, I'm going to ask Mia a couple more questions. And then Mia is a great teen. Like, I always think young people are way smarter than adults, and they're way smarter than we give them credit for. So if you have questions for either one of us, we'd be happy to answer them. What else do you think in terms of easy things that teens can do to take care of themselves right now while it's kind of stressful? So you've gotten into art. Are there other things that friends and things are doing too that...
I think music's a good thing too.
Yeah.
Baking. I've gotten into making food and stuff like that.
Yeah, she's baked a ton, and she also cleans a ton too. It's amazing. Yeah. Anything else?
I don't really know. Reading.
Yeah.
Like that.
Reading. Things to distract your mind, yeah. So let's see if we have any questions here. Augustana, NAMI on campus, tuning in. That's awesome. Let's see here. Working our way down. Mia, look at everybody saying hi. Looks like I must have cut out for a while. That's no good. Well, we'll hang out for a second and see if anybody has any questions. Sometimes it's just a friendly reminder. We know some of this, right? It's not, I didn't tell you anything revolutionary, but it's having just that reminder. I think the other thing that I think is really important is have grace with yourself. So if I asked my kids what I was like the first couple of weeks, they would say an insane lady, right? They would say somebody that was crabby and losing her mind and stressed out. And I really, really felt a lot of that. And so if you're in a place, and I hope it doesn't blow away here, we're getting a gust of wind again. If you're in a place that you don't feel good, it's really a struggle, reach out to your mental health providers. Reach out to your psychiatrist, your general practitioner. I do telehealth therapy every week. You know, I know some people, there's a stigma with mental health, but I wouldn't have any shame in telling you I was going to get treatment for asthma every week. You wouldn't judge me if I had a nebulizer. So I reached out to my psych, got my meds increased, because the trauma and the stress of COVID is really, really intense. And sometimes our brains are just drowning with it. So don't be ashamed. Be unapologetic in taking care of yourself. Give yourself grace, even as a parent, where if you yell at your kids or you do something, yeah, we don't like that as parents. We hate that probably more than they hate having to hear it. But we have to have grace that 95% of the time we're doing everything the way that we would want to, but sometimes situations like this get really, really hard. What's some reliable resources for parents and families? Gosh, there are a ton out there. So on our website, Please Pass the Love, if you go to resources, we have COVID resources, and we have a ton of great social emotional health resources. We also have a list in the state we gathered over the last couple of weeks, about 65 providers. We wanted to know providers that were still accepting new clients and doing telehealth, and so we have a comprehensive list. EFRs are doing a lot of great stuff, and they're just this week, I think, starting support groups. So online support groups, check those out. NAMI has some great stuff. There's a lot of great agencies across the state that are doing some good stuff. Unity Point in the Metro today just opened up an urgent care, behavioral health urgent care clinic. It's from 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. and it's brand spanking new, so absolutely use that too. Colby, I'm a youth counselor at Ottumwa High School. I've been encouraging my kiddos to get involved and give back. Ooh, gratitude is an amazing way to disrupt our minds, because what it does is it starts to challenge some of those same parts of the brain and the opposite parts of the brain that are really feel like they're under attack sometimes. And so gratitude ends up also releasing some endorphins. So giving back, anything that you can do to help others, whether you're delivering meals in your community or you're donating or you're writing cards, all of those are wonderful things. Is there someone specific you like to read? Voice in the Wilderness. Is that for Mia? I wonder, Mia, what do you like to read?
I like Jennifer Brown and John Green.
Jennifer Brown, John Green. Right now I'm reading Crawdad's, what's that book? It's like that bestseller one, clearly. I love the story, Where the Crawdads Sing. I'm reading that one. And I read Untamed and all sorts of other books that I don't think most people would probably want to read. Ooh, Colby, these are great examples. Make hearts for your windows. One of the things we thought would be really cool is to everybody make a green heart that says you're not alone. Green is the color for mental health, and post that in their windows. We just know that the mental health impact is we're going to start to feel that more and more. Preliminary data across the state indicates that we've had an uptick in behavioral health, substance abuse, all sorts of stuff, people not in good places. We only are going to see that rise. So those hearts in the windows are beautiful. Letters to residents in nursing homes, posting inspirational